You just need to want to understand and be curious and want to be a storyteller.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Devers, and this is Clever. Today, I'm talking to costume designer Virginia B. Johnson. Virginia was nominated for a 2025 Emmy Award for Outstanding Period Costumes for her stunning work on Netflix's American Primeval. And honestly, if you haven't already, after you listen, you should go stream it immediately. The costumes are exquisitely crafted and researched. And after you hear her explain her process, you'll want to pay close attention to those details and how the costumes help to lend historical credibility and cultural authenticity to the drama. Half Filipino, Virginia, or V as she is called, is one of the few women of color recognized in this category. And it's beautiful to learn how her Filipino heritage and community has contributed to her love of stitchcraft. She learned the ropes of costume departments by serving as a costume supervisor on some acclaimed productions, like The Social Network, Spotlight, Black Mass, and Joy. And having earned her MFA in costume design and fashion history from West Virginia University in the heart of Appalachia, she was elated when chosen by Ron Howard to work on the adaptation of Hillbilly Elegy. During the pandemic, she used her skills for good, making thousands of masks for healthcare workers. And when not designing costumes, V continues exploring the intersection of feminism and craft with Gather Here, a stitch lounge she founded and runs in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where people can learn to sew, knit, crochet, embroider, and quilt. The studio is a tribute to the many women who have taken up a needle, providing for their families and creating art that is overlooked. As you'll hear, V is deeply dedicated, rigorous, and community-oriented. She copes with the chaos of the entertainment industry by creating consistent routines for herself. It's a fascinating study in protecting your passion and your creative process from being usurped by the turbulence of industry, something we can all benefit from hearing. Here's Virginia.
My name is Virginia B. Johnson. I go by V or VBJ. I live in Greater Boston. I am a costume designer, and I would also consider myself a creative entrepreneur. I own a small business where we focus on sewing and knitting and making things. I have always loved using my hands to create, and it has translated into a varied career of making clothes and making connection. And that's something I really love and feel so grateful that I do with my life.
I would love to dive right into that making clothes and making connection. I wonder if you can bring us into your creative process in the world of costume design through a recent project. You were nominated for an Emmy. Congratulations for your work on Netflix's American Primeval, which, listeners, you should know you can stream it right now. It's a gritty, brutal Western set on the American frontier in 1857. And it depicts violent clashes between settlers, indigenous tribes, Mormon militia, and the U.S. government for control of the Utah Territory. Rugged landscape, period drama, lots of activity, and very different cultural representations. How do you start with a project like that? What's the research and the getting prepped process like?
So, you started out with the word research, which is where we always begin. As costume designers, it's so important that we understand what people were wearing and why they wore it, especially in telling this really brutal and harsh reality of being a woman, being a settler, being a member of an indigenous culture that is literally being invaded, and no one wears something just because they can. It's out of the necessity to either protect your body or to represent who you are and where you are in your community. And there's all these questions about status as well as power. And that's really the struggle of the story. And so feel really fortunate that I began my prep period in the Boston area because we have access to so many textile rich archives and examples of how people dressed. But that's just surface research, because then you have to dig in and figure out what were the things that do not survive the passage of time. And those are the clothes that people wear to actually work, and the clothes of struggle. So people living in a fort who built a fort with their hands, those clothes very rarely survive hundreds of years later because they've been worn by the working class or even less than the working class. And those clothes are worn day in and day out and really disintegrate over time. So
Yeah.
it's then looking at any sort of art and reading about descriptions, be they fiction or journalists or even the flyers that go out looking for tradespeople, encouraging people to come west. There are descriptive words about like what you need to bring and what you should have. And we take and we suddenly become detectives and really break down like, oh, if you do this sort of job, you have these kinds of clothes. And I talk a lot about this one book called Dress for the Photographer. That is a collection of daguerreotypes. And the author of this book went in and then like talked about how this image is dated based on not just what they're wearing, but maybe how the garment has been altered and the hairstyle and the accessories, so that you have a better understanding of like what fashion means. And these photos are not just of the upper class, but they are also of the middle class. So it's like a great text that is rich, and you can't just look at the pictures. And I have to remind sometimes folks that we're not just looking at pictures or looking at existing garments. We're actually needing to read and take the time to understand about people and the colors they wore and the layers they wore and all of that good stuff.
Yeah. Digging around in interpretation and double checking your theories against other historians. That must be kind of fun and fascinating, is it?
Yeah, no, it totally is. And you then get to like understand how you aren't just creating like this is what people wore in a moment of time. You are then also digging into what would this particular character wear in the moment in time.
Right.
So if you're like understanding that a certain type of person from a certain region of the country in a certain income bracket would have done X, Y, and Z to their clothes to make them last longer, or had so many resources that maybe they were wearing cutting edge fashion. Even like understanding like who got in trouble for dressing a certain way because women were being arrested for trying to wear pants or having pockets. It's like a very interesting period in time. And then we then can dig in deeper.
I know. I mean, the whole thing about pockets, the ways we've been oppressed. Just give us damn pockets. Okay, but can you tell me some specific examples from American Primeval of how you interpreted this information? Like,
yeah.
For instance, the main character.
Right. So the main character of Sarah, who's played by Betty Gilpin, we know that she is traveling alone with her son. And that already is a clue that like, how would you travel from like Philadelphia to the West? Already you're going to stand out. So you need to make some very good decisions so things don't happen to you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, there's a reason she hires somebody to help her, but he's just there to possibly handle wandering eyes or men who approach her and things like that. But she can't stand out. She has to look smart and unapproachable. And when we first see her, she's in this long, closed traveling cloak to really like hide her shape and hide herself. And it's like a bit of armor for her.
Mm-hmm.
And we like chose what is technically like a suit jacket for her. Instead of putting her in a dress that like matched top to bottom. We chose to use a jacket that wasn't the same fabric as her skirt. Once again, because it's sensible, it shows somebody who may have resources, but isn't traveling for leisure, is traveling with purpose. So we made those kinds of decisions to really highlight that, even subconsciously, the viewer isn't looking at somebody going to a party. They're out there traveling. This is like it's dark. We're not going to see as much dirt. She's not changing her clothes.
Yeah.
So we have to like make those like interpretations so that even someone who's not familiar with the period isn't watching some romanticized version of a woman's traveling outfit. And then that in contrast to the Mormons, who are all in very, very dark colors, and they all match. They're very uniform, top to bottom. They have very little embellishment, very simple. But similarly, we just wanted to make sure that they showed a nice contrast then to the women who work in the fort, who are in what I guess we would consider separates now, shirts and skirts that don't match. But once again, nobody's wearing pants. All of these women are staying in their lane.
So fascinating. And I guess we have a much more immediate connection, or at least I do as a sort of Western white woman, with the types of dress that you're talking about. But the indigenous characters, I'm just curious how you approach that. There's such a carefulness to avoid stereotyping, oversimplifying, or reducing the culture to broad brushstrokes that aren't honoring the population. And so I'm wondering how you approached doing that research and what are some of the things that you discovered. And I'm also just really curious because I'm sure it was fascinating as you did it.
Well, it's once again, we had to dig deeper because, there's something fascinating about what do we put in museums and whose culture is front and center, and what do we save? What do we in the United States literally value? And so the fact that we started this project and everybody was like, well, there have been Westerns done before, so maybe we'll be able to rent X, Y, and Z. Well, turns out we haven't done this storytelling about these specific indigenous groups. So there are technically 3 that are front and center of our story. The Shoshone, the Paiute, and the Ute. And we wanted to make sure that it was crystal clear that these 3 groups or bands had very different approaches to dealing with settler culture. So we have the Shoshone led by Winterbird. Okay, so now we have a woman in a leadership role. That's already very different from this very male-heavy Western Fort Bridger. And they are very much committed to being safeguards to the land and to the people and to their culture. And that's something they talk about in all of their interactions with any of the white characters, like how they're not going to go and they're not going to choose violence and they, need to protect one another and build community. We made the decision then to really look towards the elders in those groups, in the Shoshone, the Eastern Shoshone, and actually talked with them for oral history about how people dressed and what different roles there were and what accessories you would have had. And so through that actual history and speaking to like Curtis Barney, who is an elder of the Eastern Shoshone tribe and a craftsperson, we were able to discern even like down to like the length of a dress made from a hide and how many hides it would take to make a woman's dress and how long was the fringe. And the fact that the Shoshone have the most fringe and their dresses, though, are a little bit shorter because females were known for their ability to ride horses. So we made sure that anybody in the Shoshone culture watching would recognize or maybe even see themselves, or at least like have this subconscious connection where they understand this is actually representation that feels accurate and feels authentic. So we have that silhouette, and we also know that we're at a point where they're not trading with Westerners. They are really turning to the land. So we stayed away from anything that felt sort of Eurocentric. There's no cotton. There's nothing of that textile in their costume. But very early on in, say, the 18th century, they'd already started this wool trade in the fur traders. So we have some examples of wool and wool blankets in that world. Then we go to like the Paiute, who, if you watch the series, you'll know that they, to protect themselves, decide to side with the Mormons, and they actually take the responsibility for some of these really violent massacres and participate in some of these massacres on their own people to try to like keep the army from pressing in, to keep pilgrimages from coming into their land. And they have a far more robust trade with these Westerners. So we suddenly saw a mix of, like, say, men in leather leggings, but with a cotton shirt.
Okay.
Or with like a wool vest. So we are mixing some very Western silhouettes. And if you look at some of the daguerreotypes from that era, you'll see some images where they're all standing together and they have like a breastplate, which is like a native beaded plate that goes on the front of the chest, and like tied on with leather, but then they're wearing like a wool vest and a big white shirt, but then they have leather leggings on. One of the things that was really important to all of the elders and consultants we spoke to from the various cultural groups was that they would have remained in moccasins until the very end. That was a connection. You could feel the land. That was a thing that connected them to their culture. And so I then went back to the visuals we had, and you do see that. It's very rare that you would see a native wearing a pair of Western boots or like black leather boots. Even the main character of Isaac, played by Taylor Kitsch, like he is raised by the Shoshone. And so in our early conversations about how to represent that as a white man raised by the Shoshone tribe, he was like, I would have had moccasins. I would have grown up in moccasins. And so he, as an adult, continues to wear moccasins. So he plays the whole series in this rough terrain in moccasins. Even though he's wearing like a wool coat, he is wearing these moccasins with his leather trapper pants. So that is the connection to the culture. And we like made sure that unless somebody was truly like in with these like Eurocentric communities, we put them in moccasins.
I love learning about these details because I'm going to rewatch and be able to see all of this. And then like all of these context clues are going to make the whole story that much richer and more alive with information that makes so much sense. You sound to me like a mix of cultural anthropologist, garment forensic technologist, detective, craftsperson, and storyteller. Is there any like aspect there that I've missed? Is there more to the work?
Well, I was an English major, so I do think that when I'm like reading, I immediately am like digging in and looking for that connected read.
Yeah, that makes sense because you would have to have a relationship with the words in the script on the page in order to actually translate them through your visual.
Yeah.
Wow. What about the craft artistry? I mean, I'm assuming that a fair amount of the work is a mix of sourcing and constructing.
So specifically for American Primeval, over 90% of those costumes were built from scratch.
Wow. And how many of them do you have to build?
There were hundreds
oh my God,
hundreds of
amazing.
things were built. Yeah, because of the actual acts of violence and needing stunts. And we had characters who wore the same thing for all the episodes and wanting to see how the environment and the action affected their clothes meant that we had to have like, this is your stage 1 where things are just dirty and you got a little muddy, and oh, this is your stage 10 where you're holding somebody who's bleeding out. So you have like, you need to like walk through and make sure that we see the depth of this character's journey, not just on their body, but on what they were wearing. So like I had said earlier, like the native, that was all built. Like we had this incredible team of leather workers, small but mighty, and they were working round the clock to create these really specific looks for the various named characters, as well as like the community of people that like helped create this vibrant Shoshone village. And then we had this other team that just did all the like Eurocentric and like just the Mormons. And when you're like looking at any specific scene, like maybe we rented some boots for some people in the background, but even our main characters, their footwear was custom made. There's an amazing boot maker in Southern California, Clint Bryant. His whole family is in the boot making business. And so he made all this footwear for the actors, their stunt doubles, the animal wranglers. Hundreds of people had their hands in making this all come to life. And then whenever possible, we would also like reach out to Curtis Barney and the Eastern Shoshone to like craft breastplates and chokers and all these other bits so that our actors, our Native and Indigenous actors, knew that it wasn't just like this Filipina Americans version of what they were wearing, but that we had actually had other Indigenous hands touching what they were wearing and infusing it with meaning and purpose. And like they were working. Like I think it's so important that when we tell stories that aren't necessarily our stories, that labor is also paid to the people who we're representing.
Amen. I think so too. I think it's also a sort of indignity if you had interpreted an Indigenous culture and then have an Indigenous actor and now they have to wear a costume of their own culture. Like even if it's just a minor disconnect or not something readily apparent to somebody who's not part of the culture, it's a dishonoring.
Yeah.
And a caricature. So I really appreciate you saying that, and that we can watch the show understanding that Indigenous cultures were part of the construction, part of the collaboration, and part of the economic proceeds of the production.
Yeah. Our lead consultant, Julie O'Keefe, I reached out to her on my own to get her involved in the project because that is so important to me. And I didn't just want someone to put a stamp of approval. This research looks good. Like I wanted somebody who would actually put me in contact with people who make things and who like are elders in their community who are teaching members of the community how to make things. And I that was just so important to me. And Julie O'Keefe was like just such a great partner in making those connections and really like understanding that I wasn't just interested in putting some clothes on bodies, but I wanted to like connect with the people that we represented.
Yeah, that authenticity, I think, comes through in the show. And all of this seems like it's invisible, but it's not. It actually does translate to the screen somehow. You feel, as a viewer, I felt more connected to the characters, I think, in part because I didn't question their credibility. I didn't question the non sequiturs or anything didn't feel, non-analogous to who they were. But I also feel like it's really these steps that we can take by these brave people like you to help the industry itself, not just costume design, but the entertainment industry become less extractive and more generative,
right,
is really, really important.
Yeah.
I wonder if you can talk me through some of the other projects that you've done in terms of maybe just some details. As a viewer, if I'm watching Hillbilly Elegy or another movie that you want to talk about, what kind of details can I look for that would be evidence of your careful craft and curation and character development?
So there are all of these things I think that I want the viewer to take for granted, but actually were like very thoughtfully crafted. So like everything from Mama's t-shirt in Hillbilly Elegy. She has like all these series of t-shirts and they're all oversized and they have like graphics on them. Well, every single graphic was created and then they go through an intense aging process. And the t-shirts were all made because we wanted the proportions on Glenn to feel the same as the proportions on the images of Mama that existed.
Oh, wow.
So we do all of these little things. And then my hope is that when you're watching, you don't bump on it. You just are like, oh yeah, that's Mama. And you don't think, oh, the cardinal is the state bird of Ohio, so that's why she has that t-shirt. You just think, oh, she was into Christmas t-shirts or whatever, you know, like, or my grandma wore cat t-shirts too. Just that it feels familiar and real. Getting to that point is like a digging deep where you're, you know, mocking up a variety of different t-shirts and trying to figure out what are the colors and what feels real and getting it approved. And all of that work happens. But in the end, you just see an oversized t-shirt. But my hope is that you aren't thinking about it, that you just accept it and it feels like authentic. And the same is true. Like I love doing these like action comedies. They're escapist for me, but I put the same amount of effort and thought into them where I'm thinking about the character and who is this person and where do they shop and what they wear, what does it say about them? And so I think about like The Parenting, which is this horror comedy and everybody's just there for one weekend and you're just digging into like, if you are doing a Meet the Parents and the house that you go to is haunted and you're gay, like what did you pack and how did you overthink it? And then if you're like the Midwestern parents and you know you're going to meet your son's fiance's rich, uptight parents, what did you bring? And then if you are the person who conjured a demon and you're running the Airbnb, like what makes you tick? And like, so in all of those fittings, we're going through and doing all kinds of different options and trying to figure out what feels right and how it all works in the world with the hope that when somebody watches it, they're like, oh, I see me. Oh my God, when I introduce my person to my parents, this feels right. And it's so awkwardly funny. And if Parker Posey was conjuring a demon, you know, she was probably a modern dancer or like really liked movement classes in theater school, you know, like, so you're just trying to like put that all together. And I'm like, you know, a mystical color is purple. And she's like, oh, do you know purple people? And I was like, you're a purple person, you know, so you're just kind of working through all of that to make sense of a world, even when it's chaotic.
First of all, I haven't seen that movie, but I need to if Parker Posey's conjuring demons. But it brings up the difference between like historical accuracy and authenticity versus fictional character development. And they both sound fascinating and fun, but one sounds a little bit more like the detective work and another one sounds a lot more like I'm going to take everything I know about humans and rifle through it to sort of concoct a little bit more about this character from what's on the page and everything I know.
Right.
And that sounds really fun.
It is. And it's like also suddenly this kind of person might wear this, but you in this world might choose something different. So you're suddenly like, you're opening up more options just because you're in a made up world, in a made up environment. And you might make decisions about color and texture and everything, but suddenly, unlike the real world, where you just end up in an Airbnb and who knows, your bathrobe might match the wallpaper. In these made-up worlds, suddenly I have to really care that your bathrobe doesn't match the wallpaper. So you are, once again, still having to have a pretty tight rein on things so that realism doesn't mess things up. if that makes any sense.
Yes, it does. And so that sounds like there's a lot of collaboration then with the production designer so that you can anticipate what the whole like color palette's going to be in a certain frame.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a little bit of a systems nerd, but I wanted to ask you a bit about the logistics because in addition to this research and artistry and even fantastical character development, there's a lot of people and movement and deadlines and things have to get done. And can you just tell us what that looks like a bit, like moving all this stuff?
Yeah. So I'm currently on a television show, designing a television show that's like been in production for 15 years. And this is my first season on it. So I'm bringing like a new perspective, but also learning on the job about these characters that have existed for 15 years. But we still, even though it's been in production that long, we're still having to budget the episode and source the costumes, and different things are happening to them. So we have a tailor shop and they do everything from like alter regular clothes that maybe we bought off the rack, but it's the apocalypse, so it's from 15 years ago, and then or build things from scratch. So I do spend a lot of time doing sketches, and I'll do flats. And for those people that aren't in the fashion industry, it's just like line drawings that have a lot of details about like, this is a zipper and I want these kinds of welt pockets, or I want to overdo the pockets and I want lots of top stitching.
Sort of like blueprints.
Yeah, exactly. And then we have this whole aging and dyeing department, and they take everything and make sure it doesn't look new. I have very rarely gotten to work on a show where people are buying and then putting on brand new clothes. Everything that we use has to get touched. And that's like, for me, really, really, really important. And we do build that into the budget too. Like if we know someone's going to just come in for one day and we maybe aren't going to fit them until the morning of, we build in money to buy multiple sizes and then get it into the aging process so that nothing looks like it came out of a shopping bag if it wasn't supposed to. And sometimes that's not very cost effective, but I think if you put in all this effort for everyone else to look lived in, even those like special guests need to have that element as well. We have everything from the people in the costume shop that are just moving everything through the works. And for people who don't know this, we don't necessarily shoot in order. We're shooting all over the place. So we can be like working on stage shooting the end, and we've like done all the stuff to the clothes for the very end. And then we need those clothes to be fresh and clean. And so there's a costume shop making all those multiples and working through what that might look like and fitting their stunt doubles. All of that's happening behind the scenes, because I think people think about behind the scenes, it's just the people putting the clothes on the body, but there's all these other people doing all the stuff to get the clothes to the people putting the clothes on the actors. So then we have the set team as well. And once we start shooting, they're like on their own planet and they have their own stresses, and they're checking in with the people that are giving them the clothes to make sure they have what they need to get through the day to day. So I work closely with a costume supervisor who's managing the people and making sure we have enough people and going in and asking for more resources when we need them. And then I have an assistant costume designer who's there to like really push the work through. So, we finish a fitting, they're like, okay, I'm going to make sure to stop at the tailors, explain what these notes are. And then I'm going to take this, they walk it over to aging and dyeing once that's done and go through that, because I am on this runaway train and I can't get off to continue having the conversation because I am looking at the future.
Right.
And prepping for the next fitting and trying to take everything we've done from my prep period where I've like done all this research, I've done pretty pictures, I've had meetings, and then you get in the fitting room and maybe those ideas go out the window because you're like, this color doesn't look right, or these proportions aren't quite right. So you make those alterations, and then you have to go back and look at the whole picture to make sure that you aren't changing your visual story. So that part for me is something that I've had to really hone because I trained in the theater.
Mm-hmm.
And in theater, we like do it all.
Yeah.
You do your fitting, you do tech rehearsal, and then it's on stage. And for this process, because we shoot out of order, maybe we shoot one character completely out, I am having to like go back and piece everybody back into the story and see what they visually look like.
That sounds like some serious mind fuckery. I mean, I worked in the TV industry for 15 years, and so I know the process of shooting out of order, and it's just absolutely sometimes mind-boggling when you have to like shoot a scene where a project's finished. You know, there's all these external reasons why you have to do that.
Yeah.
And then you might have to go back and shoot that same thing, but now the project's only halfway through. So you have to have either another one, or you have to remember exactly like how to undo it. It's scrambles your brain. So being able to like stay on top of the big picture while making micro adjustments is a very special skill. And keeping track of everything in a non-chronological way is,
Right. It's just like also really stressful.
Yes.
The process of making television or film is incredibly stressful. And so on top of like, oh, I miss the days when there were just 3 of us, because suddenly like on American Primeval, there's like over 75 people every single day just in our department. And you're like, oh, you're having a bad day. So that whole side of the building is having a bad day. and you're like, I cannot manage all of these emotions.
It's a lot. And because television is an unnatural environment to work in. It's very stressful, but it's also very deadline oriented. So you like show up to work and it's almost like you have to do your job with a gun to your head every day just to make sure it's all getting done. And if everyone's under that kind of high stress, it just creates for a kind of a powder keg situation.
Yeah.
But there's also that beautiful synchronization that happens when everybody's like attuned to the same goal, and synthesizing of all the actions kind of comes together. And it feels good at the end of the day when you see it on the screen, but it is very stressful. So I just want to acknowledge that you must be clearly a badass to be to be where you are.
I think I have a good sense of humor and I try not to take any of it personally. just keep going. The only way is through.
This might be a good time to touch on how notoriously destabilizing it is too, because it's not a steady job. It's job to job. It's super intense while you're on a job. And then in between jobs, it's a different kind of intensity. You're frequently not at home because you're working on site or different locations. The hours are different. The people you're working with, the size of the teams you're working with, the conditions you're working under, it's always different. So I'm wondering how you, as a badass human, other than just being like tough and well-adjusted, how do you stabilize yourself? How does one grow roots in a profession that's so notoriously itinerant?
I am a creature of habits and structure. And I attribute that to my parents. You know, I was raised, and I say this with love, all the love in the world, by a dragon mother. My mom is half Chinese, half Filipino, and she was really strict and was like, this family doesn't get to the next day if we don't all do the thing that we're supposed to do when we're supposed to do it. And that was just childhood. And so like getting up at 5 and sitting at the piano and practicing piano, being done with that by 5:35, then doing flashcards, this was like, I had a very demanding childhood, and it was like, that was just the norm. You know, it's not that nuts, but it's still kind of really structured because I am not in control of so many other parts of my job, especially when we're filming and I'm on a design gig. Having that like beginning, middle, and end of the day is key to my well-being. So getting up, doing all of my like stretches and physical therapy first thing, just get up and get it done, and then have a warm beverage. Sometimes that's tea, sometimes that's coffee, whatever. And then just getting that information dumped to, like reading a little bit of the paper, no matter where I am in the world. I read the Boston Globe in the morning, because I live in Greater Boston, I also treasure independent news. And so I do that. And that's the morning. And then however I'm supposed to get to work, I then spend my time getting to work listening to an audiobook. I am always listening to a book. It has nothing, I try to make sure it is not in any way related to what I'm working on. So I just get to have a deep dive. Sometimes that's 20-minute drive to work. Sometimes that's currently a 58-minute drive to work. And I really just get to like be immersed in something else. And I don't think about work because the minute I get through the door, it's just inundation of questions. So then middle of the day, I always take phone calls out. It could be raining, it could be snowing, outside, walking. End of my day, which is probably the most sacred part of my day after it all wraps up, I spend 30 minutes going and reviewing what we did that day. I am a paper person. I have all of these beautiful notebooks that I note the shows on them or the projects. I keep a really great index so I can look back at things, but I write down what we did that specific day and like try to organize where we need to be the next day. So I don't have to do that in the morning. I've done it at the end of my day. And then I can close the book and leave work behind. And then I have like an intense beauty routine where I go through and like wash my face and put a warm compress on it. And I do all of those things. That's probably the thing I spend the most time on. Maybe I eat dinner. I spend time with my partner. I play Hello Kitty Island Adventure on, and then I make a cup of chamomile tea, and that's it. From chamomile tea, nothing else happens. Then I'm asleep. People are always like, "Oh, did that keep you up?" Or as soon as I have the cup of chamomile tea, I'm asleep. And that is my routine. And I did it in college. Like I have been doing the same thing for as long as I can remember, except for Hello Kitty Island Adventure.
Okay. Hello Kitty Island Adventure. I'm writing that down. Maybe
it's a cozy game. Hello Kitty and I are the same age, but she got to go to a magical island and open a bakery. And so I play that every night. It's a task-oriented game. So
you're amazing. But it sounds to me like you've created this really like solid container.
Yeah.
And all the chaos happens within these like really bracketed spaces. And so you can tolerate the chaos knowing that outside of those brackets, you have order.
Yeah.
And your body knows chamomile tea means sleep. And it's had that for years and years and years. So that's brilliant. You said that you had a dragon mom and that she's Chinese and Filipina, and I want to hear more about that childhood and how you found your way to costume design. What can you tell me? I mean, I heard piano lessons and flashcards. Yeah. So it sounds like you were a good student.
Yes, that wasn't a choice, but I loved learning, so it was fine. My siblings, maybe not so much.
How many siblings?
I have a younger sister and a younger brother.
Okay.
But my dad was in the military, so was not really present for our childhood. It was really fell on our mom and the Filipino community that we grew up in Southern California. And I suffer from eldest daughter syndrome, the eldest daughter of immigrant syndrome. So I, probably did more, and also like growing up in the 80s, than like people could imagine like a kid doing at say like 9 or 10. But I think I turned out okay. I've had a lot of therapy like any young adult to like map out like what were the benefits, because I'm always looking at like how did this benefit though in the end. And because of that community though, I did learn that it takes a village to raise entire communities, not just the children, but like caring for the elderly and like how much we can learn from one another. And my grandmother would come over from the Philippines and help take care of us. And my other grandparents would take us during the summer to help take care of us. So we had like this intergenerational upbringing that was really important to like how I learned to sew and to embroider and knit and crochet. Crocheting is incredibly like important in the Philippines, as is weaving. So I learned those things from women who weren't necessarily related to me, but who were in the world that I grew up in, and the value of that. And so I have took that all through childhood into young adulthood. And when I was in college, they asked work study students what skills they had. I was like, okay, I know how to shelve books in a library. I've taught, I babysat, but then I also said I knew how to sew because I had learned from my grandparents, and I'd already lived through this 80s revolution of altering your clothes and making things your own.
I saw Pretty in Pink.
Yeah, exactly. I know. You're oh, I just want to be Madonna and Desperately Seeking Susan and, and Molly Ringwald. And so all of that is happening. And so knowing how to sew became the skill that got me a job in the costume shop in undergrad.
Ah, that's a major connection. Yeah.
Yeah, I would not have known that what I do today was actually a job because it's not part of my upbringing. We didn't go to the theater. If we went to the theater, it was community theater, or we went to cultural shows. I did traditional Filipino dance. We would do those kinds of shows, or maybe we'd see the nativity because, we're from the Philippines, so we're Catholic. So you would do things like that, but maybe we watched something on TV. So it was college.
So many people that I've talked to that have found their way into various aspects of design have stumbled into it.
Yeah.
Part of me is always questioning, how does design do a better job of announcing itself as a profession, as a real livelihood that's fascinating and interesting and fun and creative and lucrative?
Right.
So you discovered your first job in sort of costume design was designing for the theater at your college.
Yeah.
That must have been kind of light bulby for you.
Totally, because I was a bio pre-med major.
Oh, shit.
Thinking I was going to be a doctor. I mean, my advisor was Dr. Mashesky in the biology department at Drake University. And I just happened, they were like, oh, you have all these other interests too. And it happened to be in an era where they wanted to try to get primary care physicians who knew other things that could talk to people and have real connections with their patients. So he was totally fine with the fact that I wanted to take honor study seminars on democracy in America and cultural studies on women in Shakespeare. And so I did all that other stuff, but still was taking bio and biochemistry and things like that. But I had this cool job and started doing the student productions as a designer and assisting the college professor. And then by the time I was a senior, I was designing these main stage shows. And I was I think this is what I want to do. Yeah.
Amazing.
It was wild. Yeah.
Amazing. But then getting into the entertainment industry, which is in some ways, it's kind of like the Wild West. It's sort of lawless in many ways. Doesn't have a path, really, nothing prescribed. You almost have to find your way in. How did you start doing it professionally?
So from school, I ended up going and down the path of summer stock theater, which is a great way to learn how not to do things. And you work really, really hard, and there's nothing cushy about it. So it really was a testing ground if this was really what I wanted to do. And I was no, I can do this. I want to keep going. And I would eventually end up on the East Coast. And I got a job. I was designing Candide for Opera Boston, and a producer from WGBH, the largest producing arm of PBS for this Boston, for New England, who was doing a documentary for Nova on Typhoid Mary, was at the opera and reached out to Opera Boston's artistic director to find out who designed the show and if they could get my contact information. So they reached out to see if I'd be interested in helping them get costumes for this docudrama. And I was sure. And I'm very much I'll try anything. I'm oh, I don't know how to hockey skate, but I'll learn. And even if I fall down, it's fine, whatever. I'm very just say yes, because you just don't know. So I said yes, and then was like, oh my God, I don't actually know what I'm doing. So I like bought some books and was like, oh my God, I have to figure this out. And my father-in-law is an art director. And I was like, hey, can you teach me how to read a call sheet? And so we got hopped on the phone and he like taught me how to read like call times and how to read the scenes and read the back of the call sheet. Cause unlike a lot of the people I work with, I was never a production assistant. So I literally knew nothing. And I was like, what is a one-liner? Help me. And I'm so grateful to Doug. He spent years and years as an art director for Stargate. And so he was like a really great resource. And he was like, I don't know a ton about costumes, but I do know how to read for the important stuff when you look at the schedule for shooting and stuff. And so it was like a 2-week gig, but I was like, oh, this was really great. And they thought it looked great. And that one producer, she opened the door for me and like recommended me to other GBH directors and producers. So there for like 3 years, I had steady work in that sort of PBS docudrama world and really figured it out, like learned on the job.
Yeah. And amazing that you had someone open a door for you and then keep championing you. And
yeah,
I'm sure that's something you do now that you're in a position to do that. How are you holding the door open so that the pipeline of would-be costume designers is flowing and diversified?
Once again, like if you ask, I say yes. So if somebody's like, because I'm in Greater Boston, I am surrounded by so many schools. So if somebody's like, can you come and speak to my high school class about what you do and how you got started and what are the skills that you might need to get into it? And I always say yes. I'm like, if I'm in town, of course, happy to do it. I've spoken at a bunch of universities. If there's like a conference on women in film, I will be there because I just want people to see it and understand what I do. And like, if they have any interest, like have somebody that wants to talk to them. So I have a few friends who teach at Mass Art, and they all know that if they have a student who expresses any interest in costumes or film, that they can reach out to me and I will do a Zoom with them or meet with them in person, because I want people to know that this job exists and that you don't necessarily need a fancy degree to do the job. You just need to want to understand and be curious and want to be a storyteller. Mm-hmm. That's really all of it. And so I just try to be as visible as possible. I don't want to be small. So like somebody's like, oh, do you want to talk about what your work, or even talk about shows I didn't even like working on? But if it means I have the opportunity to like tell people what we do in this position, that is an opportunity to like connect with maybe a different group of people. And it's so worthwhile.
Thank you for doing that. I mean, that's one of the joys of this podcast, is getting to talk to people like you and help to demystify these really interesting fields of work. Can you just tell me just a little bit about Gather Here and why you started it?
Yeah. So like you mentioned earlier, this industry is very unstable. So there have been periods of time where I've done just one show the whole year. And I know people think, oh, but it's Hollywood, you must make good money. I was like, we make money. We do get paid for our efforts. But, being worried and stressed about where your next paycheck is coming from, or did you just do such a bad job, nobody wants to hire you? Like, what's going on? That kind of mental stress was like really wearing me down. And I was feeling very solitary, and like I wasn't doing enough to connect with the people in my actual neighborhood and where I live, and not getting the same kind of collaborative experience that I get when I'm working on a film set. Like I've said, like I get to go in and talk to the tailors about how clothes are made, and I get to talk to agers about how clothing gets older and how people wear it. So in 2010, I was in Iowa City helping my sister with her wedding. And she and her wife have this local store called Home Ec Workshop. And Home Ec Workshop is a yarn and fabric store, and they have a little workshop space. and they made all the bunting for their wedding tent there, and people could come and help. So many hands making light work, but also stitching intentionally for these people. And by the end of this experience, I was talking to the owner, Cody, and she's like, if this can exist in Iowa City, there's no reason it can't exist in Boston. And I sat with that for a while because I hadn't felt that kind of sense of connection to total strangers since the last gig.
Yeah.
And I was like, why doesn't this exist? So I searched for this where I live and I didn't find it. So I have a friend who's a scenic artist who said, imagine what you could build if you spent those 14 hours a day that we spend on set building what you needed. And I was like, oh my God, light bulb. What if I spent 14 hours a day for the next 6 months building what I need? And so that is how we built Gather Here, which is a fabric and yarn store. But more importantly, it's a studio space for people to come and learn and share their work. It hosts exhibits. We currently just participated in Cambridge Open Studios and paired up with the Cambridge Modern Quilt Guild to display 19 different quilts that people could come in. And because it's modern quilting, they see a variety of different techniques and have a different idea of what quilting might mean. I teach people how to sew, how to alter their clothes, but we also employ 20 people who are also getting to share what they love to make and help people on their craft journey. And one of my favorite things we've done this year is that we also collaborated with the Brattle Theater and doing one night a month, we do picks and crafts where I pick a movie that might be fashion forward or fashion adjacent, and they turn the lights on halfway so people can needlepoint or knit while watching the movie. And so we just watched Clueless and with 100 people, and they were all making something while we watched and got to talk to one another. And that is a real source of community and joy for me. And it takes all the things I love about making a film, but it happens every day of the year. And we get to do this work together. And in times of just uncertainty, it is a place where I find myself fully grounded and present in this place that is about placemaking. And so it's not just about them, it's about me.
That is a gorgeous story. I love the intentionality behind it, and it sounds like utopia, and I'm fairly close, so I want to show up to picks and crafts. Yeah. I'll look for the schedule and you'll see me there. I've loved talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your story and giving us a peek inside the process and the details that are so important to the storytelling. This has been really, really interesting. Thank you.
Amy, it was such a pleasure. Huge fan. Was so excited. So thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for listening. For a transcript of this episode and more about V and her work, including links and images, head to our website, cleverpodcast.com. While you're there, sign up for our free Substack newsletter, which includes news, announcements, and a bonus Q&A from our guests. We love to hear from you on LinkedIn and Instagram. You can find us at Clever Podcast, and you can find me at Amy Devers. And if you listen on Spotify, you can comment on the episode right there. We love to hear what you think. If you like Clever, there are a number of ways you can support us. Share Clever with your friends, leave us a 5-star rating or a kind review, support our sponsors, and hit the follow or subscribe button in your podcast app so that our new episodes will turn up in your feed. Clever is hosted by me, Amy Devers, with editing by Mark Zarowinski, production assistance from Alana Nevins and Anushka Stefan, and music by L1011.
If Parker Posey was conjuring a demon, she was probably a modern dancer.